Pink problem. James is the brightest red engine on the island of Sodor. His red coat makes him special and it makes him feel different to the other engines. He thinks his red coat is very important indeed. One day James was at the shed. He was getting ready for his day's work. Neville, Edward and Percy were there too. The Fat Controller arrived.
"James, you are to have a new coat of paint,"
he said. James was very happy to hear this.
"Yes, sir," he smiled happily. "I shall look grand with a new coat of paint."
Percy wanted a new coat of paint too. "May I have one as well, please?" he asked politely.
The Fat Controller laughed. "I'm sorry, Percy," he said, "but your coat of paint is fine. Perhaps another day."
And he left. Percy was feeling disappointed.
"Your day will come when you deserve it,"
grinned James. James puffed away to the workstation. Edward and Neville felt sorry for Percy.
"That James thinks he's so great,"
huffed Neville.
"He thinks his red paint makes him the best."
"James isn't always the best engine," said Edward. "He just likes to think he's the brightest." "James should learn never to be boastful," put in Percy. All of the engines agreed. James puffed happily along the line, feeling very proud of himself. He liked it when he was repainted. He always thought it meant he would be the most important engine on Sodor.
"I cannot wait to look my best,"
he puffed. Soon he arrived at the workstation. He reversed into the shed where the painters were waiting for him.
"I'm ready for my new coat of paint,"
smiled James.
"We'll start painting right away,"
said the painters. Then Rosie puffed in with some trucks. She had brought spare engine parts for the engines that might be in need of repairs.
"I'm going to be bright red in no time,"
James boasted to her. Rosie was not impressed.
"Tell me something new,"
she sighed. This made James a little cross.
"It's not often I get a new coat of paint,"
he said.
"Everyone gets a new coat of paint,"
huffed Rosie.
"but you don't have to make a big thing out of it."
"You're just jealous,"
snorted James. Rosie just ignored him. A painter opened his pot of paint. When James saw what was inside, he was surprised.
"That's not right,"
he said.
"The Fat Controller wants me to be red, not see pink."
The painter laughed. "It's all right, James," he said. "This paint is going to be your undercoat. But you'll have to be painted like this for a while until the paint is dried." James stuttered when he heard this.
"I don't want to be painted pink,"
he moaned.
"No choice, James," said his driver. "An undercoat is what every engine needs. How else can we keep the water off your coat of paint?"
James groaned dreadfully, but Rosie couldn't help but laugh.
"You're being painted bright pink,"
she chuckled.
"Wait until the other engines hear about this."
And she raced away, laughing out loud. James was not very happy anymore. Now he began to feel silly. Rosie raced along the line to find the other engines. She couldn't wait to tell her friends. She told Thomas and Emily at the junction, then Edward and Harvey at Wellsworth Station. And when she told Neville, he couldn't help but laugh.
"James the pink engine,"
he laughed.
"Now this I have to see."
"I'll be back later to see the end result,"
snickered Rosie, and she puffed off to find the other engines. Soon James was painted from buffer to tender in bright pink. The men stood back to look at him. They couldn't help chuckling.
"It's not funny,"
grumbled James.
"You're not standing where we are," said his fireman. "You look like a cute engine."
"Cuteness is not my thing,"
snorted James.
"Please repaint me."
"Not yet, James," said the painters. "We need to wait until the pink paint dries." Just then the foreman arrived to see James. He had urgent news.
"James, you need to take the Fat Controller's granddaughter Bridget to her birthday party at Maythwaite Station," he explained. "Hurry, please. The Fat Controller is waiting."
James didn't want to go out. He knew everyone else would laugh at him.
"Can't you get someone else?"
he asked.
"There is no one else," said the foreman. "Now hurry up, James."
And he ran back to his office. James's driver and fireman climbed back into his cab. "Come on, James," said his driver. "We can't keep Bridget waiting." He opened the regulator, but James didn't move. He didn't want to go out. The driver tried again. Still James didn't move.
"I won't go,"
huffed James. "Come on, James," called his driver. "We can't waste time." But James refused to move. The painters argued with him to try and get him to leave the shed, but James ignored them.
"I won't leave the shed looking like this,"
he moaned, and he stood still, refusing to move an inch. Later that day, Rosie was puffing back towards the workstation. She wanted to see what James looked like in his pink coat of paint.
This won't be a sight for us seeing.
She smiled happily.
It will serve him right for being so boastful.
Then she saw Arthur waiting at a signal. Rosie pulled up towards him.
Hello, Alfie.
She whistled, but Arthur wasn't pleased. He was feeling worried.
What's the matter?
asked Rosie. The Fat Controller's granddaughter Bridget is having a birthday party at Mayfway Station, he explained. James is meant to take her, but he's nowhere to be seen. Rosie was surprised to hear this. Then she had a thought.
Maybe he's back at the workstation,
she said.
I'll check right now.
And she puffed away. Meanwhile, James was still being difficult. The driver, the fireman, the painters and the foreman all argued with James to get him to leave.
"I won't go out looking like this,"
hissed James.
"Pink does not suit an important engine like me."
"The Fat Controller will be very cross if you don't get a move on," said the foreman sternly.
Then James heard Rosie's whistle. He groaned at the thought of her laughing at him. Rosie puffed up towards him and looked at him all over. She laughed and laughed.
Look at the state of you, James,
she guffawed.
You do look a sight for sore eyes.
James didn't say anything. He just sulked. The foreman ran up to Rosie.
"Can you help us, please?" he cried. "We can't get James to move, and he's causing delay."
Of course I will,
replied Rosie. So Rosie went back to change lines. When she returned, she buffed up to James and was coupled up. "Okay, Rosie," said her driver. "Do your best." Rosie took a deep breath and began to pull. She pulled and puffed and pulled as hard as she could. But still James stayed in the shed. Rosie's wheels spun and spun. Suddenly the coupling broke and she shot backwards. The driver applied a brake and she came to a stop. Rosie was surprised. "Come along, James," groaned the driver. "We can't wait any longer." Before James could answer, the Fat Controller arrived. He was very cross.
"James, what is the meaning of this?" he cried. "Bridget is waiting for you at the station, and her birthday party is going to start late."
James groaned when he heard this.
"I'm sorry, sir," he said.
"No excuses, James," interrupted the Fat Controller. "You will go straight to Knapford Station right now, and no more delays."
Then he turned to Rosie.
"Can you make sure he gets to Knapford Station, please?"
he asked.
Of course I will,
answered Rosie. James's driver opened the regulator and James puffed sulkily away. James collected his coaches and puffed off to the station. Rosie went with James everywhere he went. She didn't lose sight of him for a moment. They puffed into the station where the Fat Controller, Lady Hat and Bridget were waiting. They were not happy.
"Take us straight to the party, James," ordered the Fat Controller, "and don't dawdle."
James moaned as his passengers climbed on board. Rosie buffed up behind and was coupled up to the brake coach.
"I don't need your help, Rosie," sniffed James. "I can manage on my own, thank you."
I'm going to make sure that you get to the party if it's the last thing I do,
huffed Rosie. The guard blew his whistle and James puffed away feeling very cross. Rosie pushed from behind. They were soon on their way to Mayfway Station, but James was not enjoying himself.
"I wish I had my red coat of paint back,"
he moaned.
"Stop your complaining," his driver called. "It's your fault we're late."
"Important engines are never painted pink,"
grumbled James.
Be quiet,
shouted Rosie. This managed to keep James quiet. In the distance they saw Henry's tunnel. He whistled to let the signalman know he was coming. But then he heard some whistles.
Oh no!
He moaned to himself. On the other side of the tunnel, Neville, Emily and Thomas were waiting. They all wanted to see James in his pink coat of paint.
Come on,
Whistled Rosie.
we mustn't be late.
James grew very worried as he approached the tunnel. He really didn't want to be laughed at. Then he saw some soot fall from the tunnel. This gave him an idea. As he started to enter the tunnel, he took a deep breath and blew a great cloud of steam from his funnel. Steam shot into the air and onto the tunnel roof. Soot fell from the roof and dust flew everywhere, all over James, his crew, the coaches and Rosie. James puffed out of the tunnel, coughing and spluttering. He was covered from foot plates to tender in black soot. Everyone was shocked when they saw the mess James and his train were in. Rosie groaned when she saw the state of her paintwork.
Oh, yuck!
She cried,
I'm all dirty!
"What have you done to yourself, James?" glared Thomas.
And where's your pink coat?
asked Neville, who was puzzled. James's driver tried to get James going again, but James didn't move. He couldn't huff or puff, and he couldn't make any steam. The fireman looked inside his funnel. "All that soot has gone right down your funnel," he said. "You can't pull the train anymore."
Oh, you silly Anton!
Puffed Emily,
Now you're going to be in trouble.
and she was right. The Fat Controller arrived to see what was going on. The fireman explained what had happened. The Fat Controller fumed over to James and looked him right in the eyes.
James,
He boomed furiously.
you have done nothing but cause trouble today. All you had to do was take my granddaughter to her birthday party, but you put your silly pride first and have now got yourself into this mess.
James shuddered. He felt very shocked by the Fat Controller's words.
I shall now have to send you back to the works to be mended, and Rosie will have to take your train.
Yes, sir.
said Rosie. She was very cross with James. All of the engines were very cross with James. As soon as James was uncoupled from the train, Rosie raced quickly to Mayfleet as fast as her wheels would carry her. Emily and Thomas had to help James all the way back to the workstation. James didn't say one word at all. Thomas and Emily were pleased to have peace and quiet for the journey. They left James all alone in the shed, and the workmen went to work cleaning all of the soot off James and out of his funnel. The driver and fireman had gone home and had left James to moan on his own. It took a long time to repair James, and when nightfall came, they were nowhere near finished. The Fat Controller arrived to see James. He spoke severely to him.
Listen to me, James, he said. I know you like your red coat of paint, but what you need to understand is that my engines have to put usefulness before their pride. I know pink isn't your colour, but you have to put up with it.
James wanted to talk, but he couldn't think of anything to say.
So as a punishment,
The Fat Controller ended,
you shall stay painted pink for a few days and shunt trucks around the yards. You'll get your red paint back when you learn never to be selfish again. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
sighed James.
Very clear, sir.
So the next day, after James was better, he was busy shunting trucks. His paintwork could be seen by all of the engines. They teased him and laughed and made jokes about him. Whenever Rosie puffed by, she would always be cheeky to him.
Looks like you're not an important engine after all.
She laughed. James sighed. The trucks all laughed and sang songs about him. James goes to get a new coat, hopes to be bright and red. Shows her door who's the best, I know who takes the lead. Then he gets a big shock, his pride then starts to sink. When he leaves the shed at last, pop goes James the Pink.
Oh, the shame!
Moaned James, and he puffed away back to work.